On a frozen Christmas Eve in Chicago, Illinois, a young waitress named Ivy collapsed from hunger in an empty diner. Her last dollar spent on rent she couldn't afford. She had given up hope when the door chimed, and a man in a black cashmere coat stepped inside. Victor Kane, the most feared name in the city's underworld. He looked at her trembling hands, her hollow cheeks, and made an offer that shattered her world. Marry me tonight, and you'll never be hungry again. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. The snow fell heavy over Chicago that December evening, blanketing the streets of the South Loop in a silence that felt almost sacred. Inside Rosie's diner, a cramped establishment wedged between a pawnshop and a shuttered laundromat, Ivy Morgan wiped down the same table for the third time. Her fingers were raw from the cold that seeped through the cracked window by the door. The radiator hissed and sputtered but offered little warmth. She was 23 years old, thin as a rail, with dark circles under her green eyes that told the story of too many sleepless nights and too few meals. The diner was empty. It had been empty for hours. Christmas Eve meant families gathered around tables laden with food, laughter echoing through warm homes. Ivy had neither. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and her father had disappeared long before that, leaving behind only debts and a reputation that clung to Ivy like a shadow. She had moved to Chicago with dreams of something better, but the city had chewed her up and spit her out onto the streets, where she worked double shifts for tips that barely covered the rent on a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a landlord who knocked on her door every week, his eyes lingering too long on her face. She glanced at the clock. 9:30. Rosie, the diner's owner, had left hours ago, trusting Ivy to close up. The trust was misplaced. Ivy had been skimming quarters from the register for weeks now, just enough to buy a loaf of bread or a carton of eggs. She hated herself for it, but hunger had a way of eroding principles. Her stomach growled, a sharp, insistent pain that made her double over slightly. She pressed a hand to her abdomen and took a slow breath. The last thing she had eaten was a stale donut someone had left on a plate yesterday morning. She had told herself she would eat after her shift, but when she checked her purse, she found only a single crumpled dollar bill and a handful of pennies. Her rent was due tomorrow. She had paid it this morning, handing over every cent she had saved, leaving her with nothing. The door chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that felt out of place in the cold, dim diner. Ivy looked up, startled. A man stepped inside, and the air seemed to shift around him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. He wore a black cashmere coat that looked like it cost more than Ivy made in a year, and beneath it, a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. His hair was dark, slicked back, with a few strands falling across his forehead. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a pale gray, cold and assessing, the kind of eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away. He looked around the diner with the faint trace of a smile, as if he found the shabby surroundings amusing. Then his gaze landed on Ivy, and the smile faded. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Ivy felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her uniform stained and wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face pale and gaunt. "We're about to close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond. He walked to the counter and sat down on one of the red vinyl stools, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He unbuttoned his coat but didn't take it off. Ivy noticed his hands, large, with long fingers, and a silver ring on his right hand, engraved with a symbol she didn't recognize. "Coffee," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, with a faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. "Black." Ivy nodded and turned to the coffee maker. Her hands shook as she poured the coffee into a chipped white mug. She could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. She set the mug in front of him, careful not to meet his gaze. "Thank you," he said. She nodded again and stepped back, wringing her hands. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. The man took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What? When did you last eat?" he repeated, his tone patient but firm. Ivy felt her cheeks burn. "That's none of your business. You're trembling," he said. "And you're pale. You look like you're about to collapse." "I'm fine," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The man set down his coffee and stood. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, thick with cash. He peeled off several bills and laid them on the counter. "Sit down," he said. "I don't need your charity," Ivy said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's not charity," he said. "It's an observation. You're no good to anyone if you pass out." Ivy wanted to argue, but her legs felt like they were made of jelly. She sank onto the stool next to him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The man disappeared into the kitchen, and she heard the sound of the refrigerator opening, the clatter of dishes. A few minutes later, he returned with a plate. Scrambled eggs, toast, a slice of ham. He set it in front of her. "Eat," he said. Ivy stared at the plate, her eyes stinging with tears. She hated that she was so weak, so desperate, but the smell of the food was overwhelming, and her body betrayed her. She picked up the fork and took a bite. The eggs were warm and buttery, and she nearly sobbed with relief. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food, driven by a hunger so deep it felt like it might consume her. The man watched her in silence. When she finished, he handed her a napkin. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. She felt ashamed and grateful in equal measure. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ivy," she said quietly. "Ivy," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. "I'm Victor." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in his eyes made her shiver. There was a hardness there, a darkness that spoke of things she didn't want to know, but there was also something else, something almost gentle, buried deep beneath the surface. "Why are you here?" she asked. Victor smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile. "I was passing by," he said, "and I saw the light on. I thought I'd stop in." It was a lie. Ivy could tell. Men like him didn't just wander into diners on Christmas Eve, but she didn't press him. She was too tired, too overwhelmed. "Thank you," she said. "For the food." Victor nodded. He stood and buttoned his coat. "You should go home," he said. "It's not safe to be out alone this late." Ivy laughed, a bitter sound. "Home," she said. "Right." Victor paused, his hand on the door. He turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you have family?" he asked. "No," she said. "Friends?" She shook her head. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat again and pulled out a business card. He set it on the counter. "If you ever need anything," he said, "call me." Ivy picked up the card. It was simple, elegant, just a name and a phone number. No title, no address. She looked up at him, confused. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Victor's smile faded. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he said. And then he was gone, the door chiming softly behind him. Ivy sat in the empty diner, the card clutched in her hand, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than despair. It was a small, fragile thing, barely more than a flicker, but it was there. Hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. And somewhere in the darkness, Victor Kane climbed into the back of a black sedan, his mind already turning over the image of the girl with the hollow cheeks and the green eyes that held too much pain. He had come to the diner on a whim, drawn by a light in the window and a memory he couldn't quite shake. But now, as the car pulled away from the curb, he knew that something had shifted. The world he had built, a world of power and violence and carefully maintained control, had just been disrupted by a girl who had nothing and no one. And Victor Kane, a man who never made decisions lightly, found himself wondering what it would take to change that. Ivy didn't sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress in her studio apartment, staring at the ceiling as the radiator clanked and hissed. The business card sat on the nightstand, its edges crisp and white against the scarred wood. She had memorized the number, though she had no intention of calling it. Men like Victor didn't help people out of kindness. There was always a price, and Ivy had learned long ago that she couldn't afford to owe anyone anything. But as the hours ticked by and the cold seeped into her bones, she found herself thinking about him, the way he had looked at her, as if he could see straight through her skin to the hunger and fear beneath, the way he had made her food without asking, without expecting anything in return. It was such a small thing, but it had felt monumental. For the first time in months, someone had seen her, not as a waitress or a burden or a body to be used, but as a person. When the sun rose, pale and weak through the grimy window, Ivy dragged herself out of bed. She had the day off, but there was no relief in it. Christmas Day stretched before her like a wasteland. She had no food, no money, and no prospects. She thought about going to a shelter, but the idea filled her with a shame so deep it made her nauseous. She wasn't there yet, not quite. She pulled on her coat and walked to the corner store, where she bought a cup of instant noodles with the pennies she had scraped together. She ate it standing by the window, watching the families on the street below, children in bright winter coats, parents carrying bags of gifts, laughter rising like steam in the cold air. Ivy felt like a ghost, invisible and untethered. Her phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound. She pulled it from her pocket and stared at the screen. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. "Hello?" she said. "Ivy." The voice was unmistakable, deep, smooth, with that faint trace of an accent. "Victor." Her heart skipped a beat. "How did you get my number?" "I have my ways," he said. There was a hint of amusement in his tone. "I wanted to check on you. Did you make it home safely?" "Yes," she said. "I'm fine." "Good." A pause. "What are you doing today?" Ivy looked around her apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, the single chair by the window. "Nothing," she said. "Then have dinner with me." The words hung in the air between them. Ivy's mind raced. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Why not?" "Because I don't know you. Then this is your chance to get to know me." Ivy closed her eyes. She wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to hang up, to throw the card away, to forget about Victor Kane and his cold gray eyes. But the memory of the food he had made her, the warmth of it in her stomach, was too strong. And beneath that, something else, a curiosity she couldn't quite suppress. "Where?" she asked. "I'll send a car," Victor said. 6 o'clock. "Wear something warm." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Ivy stared at her phone, her pulse racing. She had just agreed to have dinner with a stranger, a man who radiated danger like heat from a fire. She should call him back, tell him she had changed her mind. But she didn't. Instead, she went to her closet and pulled out the only dress she owned, a simple black sheath she had bought at a thrift store years ago. It was wrinkled and outdated, but it was all she had. At 6 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up in front of her building. The driver, a man in a dark suit with a face like carved stone, opened the door for her without a word. Ivy climbed into the back seat, her hands trembling. The interior was warm and smelled faintly of leather and cologne. The driver pulled away from the curb, navigating the snowy streets with practiced ease. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving the South Loop behind and heading north toward the Gold Coast. Ivy watched the city change outside the window, the crumbling tenements giving way to sleek high-rises, the empty lots replaced by boutiques and restaurants with glowing windows. The car stopped in front of a building that looked like something out of a magazine, all glass and steel and understated elegance. The driver opened her door, and Ivy stepped out onto the sidewalk. A doorman in a crisp uniform greeted her with a nod and led her inside. The lobby was warm and bright, with marble floors and a chandelier that sparkled like ice. They took an elevator to the top floor, and when the doors opened, Ivy found herself in a penthouse that took her breath away. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was modern and expensive, all clean lines and muted colors. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. And standing by the window, his back to her, was Victor. He turned when he heard her footsteps. He had changed out of his suit and into a black sweater and dark jeans, but he still looked every inch the man who commanded attention. His eyes swept over her, taking in the dress, the worn coat, the scuffed shoes, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet intensity that made her feel exposed. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure I would," Ivy admitted. Victor smiled. "I'm glad you did." He gestured to the dining table, which was set for 2. "Please sit." Ivy crossed the room and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. The table was laden with food: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, a basket of fresh bread. It was more food than Ivy had seen in months, and the sight of it made her throat tighten. Victor sat across from her and poured 2 glasses of wine. "I hope you're hungry," he said. Ivy nodded, unable to speak. She picked up her fork and took a bite of the chicken. It was tender and perfectly seasoned, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to savor it instead of devouring it like an animal. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Finally, Victor set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. his eyes fixed on her. "Tell me about yourself," he said. Ivy looked up, startled. "There's not much to tell." "I doubt that." She shrugged. "I grew up in a small town in Indiana. My mom died when I was 21. I came to Chicago to find work, but it didn't go the way I planned." "And your father?" Ivy's jaw tightened. "He left when I was a kid. I don't know where he is and I don't care." Victor nodded slowly. "Family can be complicated. What about you?" Ivy asked, turning the question back on him. "What do you do?" Victor's smile was faint, almost sad. "I run a business." "What kind of business?" "The kind that requires discretion." Ivy felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing him say it made it real. "You're in the mob," she said quietly. Victor didn't deny it. "I prefer to think of it as providing services that others are unwilling or unable to provide." "That's a nice way of saying you're a criminal." "Yes," Victor said simply. "I am." Ivy set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Why did you invite me here?" Victor leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze intense. "Because I see something in you," he said. "Something I recognize." "And what's that?" "Survival," he said. "You're a fighter, Ivy. You've been knocked down, but you keep getting up. That takes strength." Ivy looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm not strong," she said. "I'm just desperate." "Desperation can be a kind of strength," Victor said. "If you know how to use it." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Victor stood and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "I have a proposition for you," he said. Ivy's heart sank. Here it was. The price. "I'm not interested," she said. Victor turned to face her. "You haven't heard it yet. I don't need to. I know how this works. You want something from me, and I can't afford to give it. What I want," Victor said, his voice calm and steady, "is for you to marry me." Ivy stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Victor repeated. "Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow at the latest." Ivy laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're insane." "I'm practical," Victor said. "I need a wife and you need security. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Why would you need a wife?" Victor's expression darkened. "There are people in my organization who question my leadership. They see me as too young, too reckless. A wife would give me legitimacy, stability. It would show them that I'm committed to building something lasting." "And why me?" "Because you have nothing to lose," Victor said bluntly. "And because I trust you. You don't even know me." "I know enough." He crossed the room and stood in front of her, his eyes locked on hers. "I know you're honest. I know you're desperate. And I know you won't betray me, because you have nowhere else to go." Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. "This is crazy." "Maybe," Victor said, "but it's also your only option." Ivy looked down at her hands, her mind spinning. He was right. She had nothing. No money, no family, no future. And here was a man offering her a way out, no matter how twisted or dangerous it might be. "What would you get out of this?" she asked. "Legitimacy," Victor said. "And perhaps something more." "What?" Victor's smile was faint, almost wistful. "A reason to believe that there's more to life than power and control." Ivy looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw past the cold exterior to the man beneath. He was lonely, she realized, as lonely as she was. And in that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. "Okay," she said. "I'll marry you." The wedding took place the next morning in a small chapel on the north side, a nondescript building wedged between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy. Ivy wore the same black dress she had worn to dinner, and Victor wore a charcoal suit that made him look like he was attending a funeral rather than a wedding. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just a tired-looking officiant who read through the vows in a monotone voice while Ivy and Victor stood side by side, their hands clasped together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Victor leaned down and kissed her. It was brief, almost perfunctory, but Ivy felt a jolt run through her at the touch of his lips. Then it was over, and they were walking out into the cold December air, married. The driver took them back to the penthouse, and Ivy found herself standing in the middle of the living room, unsure of what to do next. Victor disappeared into another room and returned with a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a ring, a simple gold band with a single diamond, elegant and understated. "I had this made for you," he said, slipping it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Ivy stared at the ring, her emotions a tangled mess. "Thank you," she said quietly. Victor nodded. There are some things we need to discuss, he said. Rules, if you will. Ivy looked up at him. Rules? This is a business arrangement, Victor said. But it's also a marriage, and there are expectations. First, you'll live here with me. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't force you into anything you're not comfortable with. Ivy felt a wave of relief. Okay. Second, you'll accompany me to certain events. Dinners, meetings, social gatherings. You'll play the role of my wife, and you'll do it convincingly. And if I don't? Victor's expression hardened. Then the arrangement ends, and you go back to where you were. Ivy swallowed hard. I understand. Third, Victor said, his voice softening slightly. You're free to do as you please during the day. Work, study, pursue your interests. I won't control you, but you'll be discreet about our arrangement. No one outside of my inner circle can know the truth. Who's in your inner circle? My right-hand man, Luca. My lawyer, Dominic. And a few others you'll meet in time. Ivy nodded. Anything else? Victor hesitated. One more thing, he said. There are people who will try to hurt me by hurting you. You need to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust anyone you don't know. And if anything feels wrong, you call me immediately. Ivy felt a chill run down her spine. You're scaring me. Good, Victor said. Fear will keep you alive. Over the next few days, Ivy settled into her new life. Victor gave her a credit card with no limit and told her to buy whatever she needed. Clothes, toiletries, anything to make her comfortable. Ivy was overwhelmed by the generosity, but she was also wary. She bought only the essentials, afraid that if she took too much, the arrangement would somehow fall apart. Victor was gone most of the time, disappearing for hours or even days on end. When he was home, he was distant, but not unkind. He asked her about her day, made sure she had eaten, and occasionally joined her for dinner, but there was always a wall between them, a barrier she couldn't quite breach. One evening, about a week after the wedding, Victor came home with a man Ivy had never seen before. He was shorter than Victor, with dark hair and a sharp, angular face. He looked at Ivy with open curiosity, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Ivy, this is Luca, Victor said. My right-hand man. Luca extended his hand, and Ivy shook it. His grip was firm, almost crushing. So you're the one who tamed the beast, he said with a grin. Victor shot him a look. Luca. What? I'm just saying it's good to see you settled down. Luca turned back to Ivy. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Kane. The name sent a jolt through her. Mrs. Kane. It sounded so foreign, so surreal, but she forced a smile. Thank you. Luca and Victor disappeared into Victor's office, and Ivy heard the low murmur of their voices through the closed door. She tried not to listen, but curiosity got the better of her. She crept closer, pressing her ear to the wood. Problem with the Rossi family, Luca was saying. They're pushing back on the territory agreement. Marco thinks we're weak. Marco is an idiot, Victor said, his voice cold. But he's a dangerous idiot. We need to remind him why he agreed to the terms in the first place. You want me to send a message? No, I'll handle it myself. There was a pause. You sure that's wise? You've got a wife now. You can't afford to take unnecessary risks. I'm aware, Victor said. But if I don't handle this personally, it'll be seen as a sign of weakness, and we can't afford that. Ivy stepped back from the door, her heart pounding. She had known that Victor was involved in dangerous work, but hearing him talk about it so casually made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She went to her room and closed the door, trying to steady her breathing. That night, Victor knocked on her door. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, still dressed in his suit, his tie loosened. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. Can I come in? He asked. Ivy nodded and stepped aside. Victor entered and sat down on the edge of her bed, his hands clasped between his knees. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he looked up at her, his gray eyes searching her face. I know this isn't what you signed up for, he said quietly, and I know it's not easy. But I want you to know that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. Ivy sat down beside him. Why did you really marry me? She asked. And don't say it's just for legitimacy. There's more to it than that. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. My father was a brutal man, he said. He built this empire on fear and violence, and he taught me to do the same. But he also taught me that power is meaningless if you have no one to share it with. He died alone, hated by everyone who knew him. I don't want that to be my fate. So you married me to avoid being alone? I married you because I saw something in you that I thought I had lost, Victor said. Hope. The belief that things can be better, even when everything seems hopeless. Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I have that anymore. Victor reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Then maybe we can find it together. They sat in silence, their hands intertwined, and for the first time since the wedding, Ivy felt a connection between them, fragile and tentative, but real. And in that moment, she realized that this arrangement, strange and dangerous as it was, might be the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The first crack in Ivy's new life appeared 2 weeks after the wedding. She was in the kitchen making coffee when the penthouse door burst open. 3 men stormed in, their faces hard and their hands reaching for weapons. Ivy froze, the coffee pot slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. "Where's Kane?" one of them demanded. He was tall and broad, with a scar running down the side of his face. Ivy's heart hammered in her chest. "He's not here." The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying." "I'm not," Ivy said, her voice shaking. "He left this morning. I don't know where he went." The man grabbed her by the arm, his grip bruising. "Then you're coming with us." Before Ivy could scream, the door to Victor's office flew open, and Victor emerged, a gun in his hand. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. The man holding Ivy hesitated, then released her. Ivy stumbled back, her arm throbbing. Victor stepped between her and the intruders, his gun trained on the scarred man. "You have 5 seconds to leave," Victor said. "Or I'll put a bullet in each of you." The scarred man sneered. "Marco sends his regards. He says the deal is off, and if you don't back down, he'll come for everything you have, including her." Victor's jaw tightened. "Tell Marco that if he so much as looks at my wife again, I'll burn his entire operation to the ground." The men exchanged glances, then turned and left, slamming the door behind them. Victor lowered his gun and turned to Ivy. She was trembling, her face pale. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now. Ivy shook her head, though her arm ached where the man had grabbed her. "Who was that?" "Marco Rossi's men," Victor said grimly. "I should have known he'd try something like this." "What does he want?" "Control," Victor said. "He thinks he can intimidate me into giving up territory, but he's wrong." Ivy felt a surge of anger. "You said you'd keep me safe, and I will," Victor said. "But this is the world I live in, Ivy. It's dangerous and it's unpredictable. I can't change that. Then maybe I shouldn't be here." Victor's expression hardened. "Where would you go? Back to that apartment? Back to starving on Christmas Eve?" Ivy flinched. "That's not fair." "It's the truth," Victor said. "You're safer here with me than you would be anywhere else." Ivy wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She had nowhere else to go. She was trapped, bound to a man she barely knew, and a life she didn't understand. That night, Ivy couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in her mind. She had been terrified, more terrified than she had ever been in her life. And the worst part was that she knew it wouldn't be the last time. Around midnight, she heard a knock on her door. She opened it to find Victor standing there, still dressed, his face drawn and tired. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Ivy shook her head. "No." Victor hesitated, then stepped into the room. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened today. You didn't deserve that." "It's not your fault," Ivy said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "It is," Victor said. "I brought you into this world, and now you're a target. I should have thought about that before I asked you to marry me." Ivy looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the guilt etched into his features. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked again. "And don't give me the same answer as before. I want the truth." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he sat down on the edge of her bed, his hands clasped between his knees. "Because I'm tired," he said quietly. "Tired of the violence, the betrayal, the constant fight for power. I thought that if I had someone by my side, someone who wasn't part of this world, it might give me a reason to change, to be better." Ivy felt her throat tighten. "I can't save you, Victor. I can barely save myself." "I'm not asking you to save me," Victor said. "I'm asking you to stay, to give this a chance." Ivy looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. It was a small thing, barely visible beneath the layers of armor he wore, but it was there, and it made her decision for her. "Okay," she said. I'll stay. Victor reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Thank you, he said. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the day pressing down on them. Then Victor stood and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at her. If anything ever happens to me, he said, there's a safe in my office. The combination is your birthday. Inside, you'll find everything you need. Money, documents, contacts. It's yours. Ivy's eyes widened. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that you're not trapped, Victor said. You always have a way out. And then he was gone, leaving Ivy alone with her thoughts and the realization that she had just been given the key to her freedom. But instead of feeling relieved, she felt something else, a strange, unsettling sense of loss. The next morning, Ivy woke to find a package on her doorstep. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. She brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of her, taken from a distance, walking down the street outside the penthouse. On the back, scrawled in red ink, were 3 words, "You're next, sweetheart." Ivy's blood ran cold. She dropped the photograph and ran to find Victor. He was in his office on the phone, but he hung up the moment he saw her face. What happened? He demanded. Ivy handed him the photograph, her hands shaking. Victor's expression darkened as he read the message. He crumpled the photo in his fist and threw it across the room. Marco, he said, his voice a low growl. He's escalating. What are we going to do? Ivy asked. Victor looked at her, his eyes hard. We're going to end this, he said, once and for all. The war between Victor Kane and Marco Rossi began in earnest the next day. Victor called a meeting with his inner circle, Luca, Dominic, and a handful of others Ivy had never met. They gathered in the penthouse, their faces grim, their voices low and urgent. Ivy stayed in her room, but she could hear the tension in their voices, the weight of the decisions being made. That evening, Victor came to her. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his jaw tight. I need you to leave the city for a few days, he said. Ivy shook her head. I'm not leaving you. It's not safe here, Victor said. Marco is unpredictable, and I can't focus on what needs to be done if I'm worried about you. Then let me help, Ivy said. I'm not useless, Victor. I can do something. Victor looked at her, his expression softening. You're already doing more than you know, he said. But this is my fight, not yours. It became my fight the moment I married you, Ivy said. I'm not running away. Victor stared at her for a long moment, and then, to her surprise, he smiled. A small, genuine smile that transformed his face. You're stubborn, he said. So are you, Ivy shot back. Victor laughed, a low rumbling sound that made Ivy's heart skip a beat. All right, he said. You can stay, but you do exactly as I say. No arguments. No arguments, Ivy agreed. Over the next few days, Ivy watched as Victor orchestrated his response to Marco's threats. He was methodical, calculating, moving his pieces across the board with the precision of a chess master. He met with allies, made deals, called in favors, and slowly, the tide began to turn. But Marco wasn't going down without a fight. He struck back with a viciousness that shocked even Victor's hardened associates. One of Victor's warehouses was burned to the ground. A shipment of goods was intercepted and destroyed. And then, in a move that sent shockwaves through the organization, Marco kidnapped one of Victor's men, a young soldier named Tony, and left his body in a dumpster as a warning. Victor's fury was a terrible thing to behold. Ivy had never seen him like this, cold, ruthless, utterly without mercy. He called a meeting with his top lieutenants and laid out a plan that would end Marco once and for all. We hit him where it hurts, Victor said, his voice like ice. His clubs, his businesses, his family. We take everything from him, and we make sure he knows why. Luca nodded. When do we move? Tonight, Victor said. Ivy felt a chill run down her spine. Victor, are you sure about this? Victor turned to her, his eyes hard. I don't have a choice, he said. If I don't act now, Marco will keep coming after us, and eventually he'll succeed. Ivy wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his eyes. This was who he was, a man who fought for what was his, no matter the cost. And for better or worse, she was his now. That night, Victor left the penthouse with Luca and a dozen armed men. Ivy stayed behind, pacing the living room, her nerves frayed. She tried to distract herself with a book, but the words blurred together on the page. All she could think about was Victor, out there in the dark, facing down an enemy who wanted him dead. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Ivy was about to call Victor when the door opened, and he walked in. He was covered in blood. Not his own, she realized with a jolt, and his face was a mask of exhaustion. "It's done," he said simply. Ivy ran to him, her hands fluttering over his chest, his arms, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," Victor said, "but Marco is. He won't be a problem anymore." Ivy felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. She threw her arms around Victor, burying her face in his chest. He stiffened for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now." Ivy pulled back and looked up at him. "What about you? Are you safe?" Victor's smile was faint, almost sad. "I'm never safe, Ivy. That's the price of this life." Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. "Then maybe it's time to change your life." Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe," he said, "but not tonight." He kissed her then, a slow, deliberate kiss that made Ivy's heart race. It was different from the kiss at their wedding, deeper, more urgent, filled with a need that neither of them had acknowledged until now. When they finally pulled apart, Ivy was breathless. "Stay with me tonight," Victor said quietly. Ivy nodded, unable to speak, and for the first time since their wedding, they fell asleep together, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. The weeks that followed Marco's defeat were a time of cautious peace. Victor's organization stabilized, and the threats that had loomed over them began to fade. But the war had taken its toll. Victor was quieter, more introspective, and Ivy could see the weight of his choices pressing down on him. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Ivy asked him the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" Victor looked at her, his gray eyes soft. "No," he said. "Do you?" Ivy thought about it. The fear, the danger, the uncertainty. But she also thought about the moments of connection, the way Victor had held her after the confrontation with Marco, the way he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. "No," she said. "I don't." Victor smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said, "because I have something to show you." He led her to his office and opened the safe he had told her about weeks ago. Inside, as he had promised, were stacks of cash, documents, and a set of keys. But there was also something else, a deed to a house. "What's this?" Ivy asked, picking up the deed. "A house," Victor said, "in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. I bought it for you." Ivy stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because you deserve a place that's yours," Victor said. "A place where you can feel safe, where you can build a life. If you want to leave, you can. No strings attached." Ivy felt tears stream down her face. "I don't want to leave," she said. "I want to stay with you." Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Then stay," he said, "and let's build something together, something better than what I had before." Over the next few months, Ivy and Victor began to transform their arrangement into something real. They moved into the house Victor had bought, a charming 2-story with a garden and a porch swing. Ivy enrolled in community college, pursuing a degree in social work. Victor began to step back from the more violent aspects of his business, delegating to Luca and focusing on legitimate ventures. It wasn't easy. There were still threats, still dangers lurking in the shadows. But they faced them together, and with each challenge, their bond grew stronger. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the city, Ivy turned to Victor. "Do you think we'll ever have a normal life?" Victor laughed. "I don't think either of us knows what normal is," he said, "but I think we can have something better, something that's ours." Ivy leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I think so too," she said. And as the snow began to fall, blanketing the city in white, Ivy thought back to that Christmas Eve when she had been starving and alone, with no hope and no future. She thought about the man who had walked into the diner and offered her a lifeline, no matter how twisted or dangerous it had seemed at the time. She had been afraid then, but now, sitting beside Victor, watching the world transform around them, she felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt hope, and she felt love. Victor reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Ivy asked. "For giving me a reason to believe," Victor said. That there's more to life than power and control. That there's something worth fighting for. Ivy smiled, tears streaming down her face. You gave me that too, she said. They sat in silence, their hands intertwined, as the snow continued to fall. And in that moment, Ivy knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because they had found something rare and precious, a love born from desperation and danger, but tempered by hope and the belief that even the darkest lives could be transformed. The city stretched out before them, glittering and alive, and Ivy felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had been lost, but now she was found. She had been broken, but now she was whole. And she had been alone, but now she had someone by her side who would fight for her, protect her, and love her, no matter what. Victor leaned down and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of promises and new beginnings. And as they pulled apart, Ivy looked into his eyes and saw the future, a future filled with challenges and triumphs, with love and laughter, with a life that was theirs to build together. Merry Christmas, Ivy, Victor whispered. Merry Christmas, Victor, Ivy whispered back. And as the snow fell around them, covering the world in a blanket of white, they sat together on the porch swing, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and had chosen to walk into the light together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Ivy and Victor's journey, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Thank you for being part of this story.